Nächster Halt.
Also da es gibt ja viele Leute, die die Medien mögen, jedenfalls wenn sie über einen berichten, ja.
Ja, du bist ein mächtiger Mann dadurch.
Ja, eben nicht, oder? Weil die Medien, die finden die alles gar nicht so wichtig. Oder sie
Doch, die
sie
Medien
behaupten
sind viel
es.
wichtiger, als sie es wahrnehmen.
Das ist klar, aber das CERN-Loch finden die nicht so publizierbar.
Ja.
Und das stellt man sich natürlich auch wieder Fragen, wieso denn eigentlich? Ich habe auch, also Kritik, ja, aber Kritik ist doch was Positives, sagt man immer, da kann man was lernen.
Ja, aber die Wissenschaft ist ja nicht nur Wissenschaft, sie ist ja auch eben was Menschliches.
Ja, das
dadurch
ist wahr.
Ist sie ein bisschen schwach.
Ja, das Fleisch ist schwach, oder? Wie sagt man denn? Also Higgs zum Beispiel, der Herr Higgs, ja, der hat ja auch einen Nobelpreis gekriegt für seinen God-Particle, nicht?
Ja.
Genau, das hat ihn wahrscheinlich auch gefreut, oder?
Mit Sicherheit.
Ja.
Ich hatte irgendwas über ihn gelesen, dass er sich kritisch gegen CERN geäußert hätte.
Aber erst nach dem Nobelpreis. Ja, ja, weil er hatte schon einen. Zwei kann man nicht haben im gleichen,
aber
oder?
Es ist
Und kann man die sammeln? Die Nobelpreise? Kann man mehrmals für das gleiche Nobelpreis? Aha.
Jawohl.
Ah ja, gut. Siehst du, das ist ja auch lustig. Du hast mir einen Kommentar geschickt, den du geschrieben hast. Und ich habe mich dann nicht getraut zu beantworten, weil ich hab nichts verstanden. Also ich würde eine sehr schlechte Wissenschaftler abgeben, weil schon bei Einstein und das ergibt C, habe ich nicht genau gewusst, was denn C ergibt und so weiter. Und ich wollte da nicht so lange nachfragen, sonst denkst du, ich habe keine Ahnung, was hier stimmt.
Ich habe es verstanden als die Fachleute, das ist sicher.
Bist du sicher?
Ganz sicher.
Ja, das ist gut.
Nein, sondern es zeigt nur, wie absurd er für wie absurd er es hält.
Ach, trotzdem wird es aber
kleines Ding wie
publiziert.
CERN, ja.
Ich habe ganz viele Artikel gelesen, da steht, der Hawkins denkt jetzt, das Universum kann kaputt gehen. Achtung und Warnung. Und dann, wenn man den Artikel ein bisschen weiterliest und auch dann stellt sich raus, dass das eben nur theoretisch ist. Irgendwie. Ja?
Rein, es ist eine Methode, die Aufmerksamkeit auf CERN zu lenken.
Also,
Er ist in Wirklichkeit ganz eng mit CERN.
das weiß ich. Ja, I welcome Professor Otto E. Roessler for this new interview about the danger at the CERN LHC, the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva. Welcome, Otto.
Welcome, Armin.
We're having this interview in exactly the same location we had the first interview a few years ago at the University of Tuebingen in Germany. And in these years between the two interviews, quite a few things happened. So we'd like to discuss these and a few new things and make a new point on the developments at the CERN LHC. Quite some years ago, Wagner and Sancho, Sancho is a scientist also, I think, and Wagner, yes, in the US.
Both. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, both. They have made a complaint at the court of Hawaii in order to stop the LHC. Mm-hmm. They lost. A few years later, Gabriela Schroerke from Germany went up to the highest German court to stop the CERN LHC, and she lost. Then a complaint was made at the UN Human Rights Commission in Geneva and failed. The CERN LHC seems untouchable. You agree, Professor?
Yeah, that's the phenomenon, yes. Mm-hmm. it's impressive, of course. Nothing imposes more than being unimpressible.
Exactly. Yeah. I remember I had when Louis Sancho and Wagner in the US, they made this complaint. We were in contact and they asked me to find a person. In the US there are these professions, I don't remember what they're called, but they bring court papers to a company in order to inform them that the complaint is happening against them. And in Geneva I found this similar person to the US, huissier it's called in Geneva. It's a kind of special lawyer with a special certification from the state, and he can do that theoretically. And I was quite impressed. I gave him 500 Swiss francs, and he said, "Yeah, I'll do it. It's interesting," and he found it himself quite interesting to do. And then after he went there, we had a last meeting, and it was quite strange. He was very surprised, because usually he is given a kind of slight bit of respect in his work. But when he came to the CERN with the papers, I just said, "No, go away. We don't need to let you in, we don't need to come out, we don't need to take these papers, goodbye, sir." And so yeah, this is another example, I think, of how untouchable they are.
Yeah, it's a state of its own.
Yes. I think they call it supranational.
It is on the same level as the UN.
Yes.
And both are very closely, they like each other, so to speak. And
why do they like each other? Because they're both international organizations?
Yeah, and it's automatic. I mean, it's such a small circle of high-ranking people, they have to like each other. Why not? Yes.
Yes. And could this be part of the attraction of the LHC, of the CERN, that it's so international, it's global, it's about peaceful, scientific experiments? And
the most beautiful science of all of them, namely physics.
Yeah.
And the people in physics are very well educated and very humble, usually, in their manners.
Yes.
So the whole thing is something very, very positive.
And you are not exactly as positive about this as they are. Why?
No, I would say science is wonderful, and it's great if one has a chance to be supported with doing something important. And CERN is lucky to have this status. And as long as they follow scientific principles, everything is fine. Only when they go beyond what science, the customs of science, one of them is openness, the other would be honesty. If for some reason one decides not to follow the usual standards of science, then the whole thing becomes a little bit hard to support, so to speak. And then, for example, if you are building a bridge in one of the countries of the West and of the East as well, you have to get certificates that this is safe, what you are doing.
Yes.
And very strangely, CERN, that this is about the only thing I would criticize with CERN, that they do not renew their 7-year-old safety report.
Well, even the 7-year-old safety report they did was done by their own staff.
Yeah.
Which is quite interesting. I mean, if I have a company and I want to assess the security, usually I get an external company that independently assesses this security.
Yeah, this would of course be possible, but it has not been done. But still, to have a safety report is much better than to have no safety report.
Yes.
And now this safety report is 7 years old. They are doubling their energies. They plan to double the energy very soon. Maybe on the 8th of May, I was told this morning.
Yeah.
And in that case, before the 8th of May, CERN would be, according to international standards, be forced, would be expected to, very humbly, to present a new safety report, which takes into account new results which were not available 7 years ago. For example, building the atomic bomb took less than 6 years between the letter from Einstein to the American president and the final result, which made Einstein weep. That was only 6 years. So now we have 7 years where scientific progress is not being considered by CERN in the context of its new experiment, which is something very strange to the world. And that's essentially my only message, that I would like to see a written safety report in which CERN is disclaiming the dangers that have been presented scientifically in scientific publications in referee journals in the meantime.
But that report would have to be published and reviewed again by peer scientists, right?
Okay, yes, but you see, being afraid even of presenting a not quite clean report is even worse than having a not quite clean report.
I understand, yeah. On the other side, if I would be one of these 10,000s of scientists,
yes,
well paid, driving my bicycle in Geneva, and making what I love most to do, scientific experiments,
yep,
I would be maybe also inclined to say, well, if there is anything that becomes dangerous to us, potentially, we won't go that way.
Not if you have signed a document which forces you to keep your mouth shut.
You think they have?
I mean, even German professors have to sign such documents. Why should CERN people not sign such documents?
Did you have to sign such a document?
I never did. That was my problem once.
Really?
Yeah.
It was your problem that you didn't want to sign a document to shut up?
No, it wasn't even shown to me. Sorry. Maybe I would have signed it if it had this level of fairness. So maybe CERN is more advanced in that respect.
I mean, it is true that over the years I've been interested and working on this subject. I've been always impressed by how can it be that so many scientists are on a project and not one of them shows some openness to criticism or to dangers that are possible, but they seem like a homogeneous group of people which all have the same voice and the same ideas and the same position.
Yeah, it's a very interesting sociological phenomenon. Yes.
Or in another way put, if I look at something, when also it is a controversial subject, but I would take this now as an example. If we look at whistleblowers like Edward Snowden or Julian Assange, we don't have that at the CERN. We have no whistleblowers, apart from you're a bit of a whistleblower in a certain way, because you're also part of the scientific community.
Yeah. I call myself the ship's boy on the big ship. What was the name? You know, the very big one, Titanic.
Well, you are the first ship's boy that is also co-founder of the chaos theory, because usually ship boys don't found chaos theories. I mean, while they're doing their work.
But one doesn't talk about younger children who sometimes have become saints in the Catholic Church. So even young people can be very high level at the same time.
I see. I see.
No, somehow this was not the right way to put it.
Also, my next question would be, do you still consider, I mean, when I did the last interview with you, maybe I have to backtrack a bit, I had quite a lot of media attention for this interview. You were also, I think, invited to 2-3 new interviews afterwards, one with RT. And there was one interesting long article actually in the Register. It's an online publication in the UK, I believe, where the title was the CERN will explode the sun and the moon. And you were quoted in that interview because you said to me, one option which I would recommend would be to build the CERN LHC on the moon.
Yeah. Which is very expensive, of course.
Which they say, actually that was interesting because it was actually discussed in some forums between some scientists, and they said it's not a bad option, but it's too expensive.
Yeah.
Do you still consider moving the LHC to the moon a viable alternative, Otto?
Yes, even though it would be so expensive that it would postpone the experiment for quite a few years. That's the price to pay, so to speak. Yeah.
Okay. And would you still consider that alternative also a safe alternative, based on the know-how you have?
Let us, the risk would be so much smaller that one could, that probably if one would take a vote on the planet would say yes, we do it together.
Okay.
We shoulder it.
Okay. Now, Stephen Hawking, a very smart person, we all know, has...
We saw the movie, or at least,
Yes.
Yeah.
Has apparently also thinks now that the LHC is dangerous, but only if it has the size of the Earth.
Yeah.
Does this statement make any sense to you, Otto?
Yes, it is. It is promoting CERN in the public consciousness of the planet.
Okay, so it's kind of advertisement for CERN.
Yeah.
Okay, because interestingly, some media, I've read some articles that say like, Hawking says the CERN is dangerous, it could destroy the universe, and then when you read the whole article it says, yeah, but only if the CERN LHC has the size of the Earth.
Yeah.
So this is quite interesting.
It's an ingenious strategy, so to speak, if you are absolutely sure that there's no danger whatsoever involved, which is nice to see and to watch when people are so sure.
At our last interview, Otto, you said that you would be interested in having a discussion directly with Stephen Hawking.
Yeah.
Would you still be interested in that personally?
Very much so. I mean, I admire Stephen Hawking very much, and he happens to be a friend of a person whom I consider a friend in science.
Yeah.
And I know several persons who are quite close to him, and I have a very deep respect for him, and he plays the role of a saint nowadays, and I mean, everyone has to say he deserves it. I mean, he is one of the few people who have proven that their resilience and mental strength and probably also kindness is superhuman.
Yeah, I agree with that also. The only thing I would say is, I mean, he has made, I think, science, his areas of science much more popular to many people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Also by the books he wrote, by the interviews, by his operations. Yes, I mean, the only question would just be, is he too optimistic, too positive? Does he in general not see much danger? Because, I mean, I can understand there is, for example, this Mars One mission. Mm-hmm. There are apparently over 10,000 people who have inscribed themselves so they could participate in a one-way trip to Mars, which they would never be able to come back technically. Technology is not right for that. And they're basically accepting to leave this Earth and die somewhere between Earth and Mars, I suppose, because I don't think they will ever get there. But they still want to do it. They are very eager to do it. So
they're all heroes.
Yes. Yeah. So I was thinking maybe this thing of being a hero and discoveries, like it reminds me a bit of in the old times with the ship when they discovered America, Christopher Columbus. This all sounds very adventurous, exciting. Rewarding, so is that maybe a reason why somebody like Stephen Hawking doesn't like or doesn't see the dangers that science also poses always?
No, I'm not sure. I think he is so deeply imbued in the techniques, scientific techniques that he is a master of, that he cannot doubt these techniques, and it's it is general relativity, which is the most, most difficult mathematical version of of theoretical physics.
Yeah.
And very few people manage to get good exams good enough to have a career in that area.
I see.
So it combines the highest level of mathematics, which is hard to achieve, with the highest level of physics, which is a science. So it's two kinds of genius that you need to be accepted in that community. So the whole community believes it is a sacred community. And therefore it is very hard to avoid a consensus in such a community.
But we all agree that, for example, the atom bomb, just to take one example, was a scientific discovery, in itself not bad, not good, but then was used for the bad.
Yeah, and Einstein thought we'd need it as a deterrent, and then it was suddenly used against his will.
Yeah.
And he felt betrayed on the one hand, but also responsible because it was his brainchild.
Yeah.
So he was the first victim, besides the people who were killed by the bomb.
Okay. But now your main theory, Otto, or your theory about the CERN LHC, is that a stable black hole would be produced.
Now that's not my idea. That is CERN's claim.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I can agree that this sounds reasonable.
Who is that somewhat, if I may ask?
Sorry? Yeah?
You said somewhat's claim?
No, CERN.
CERN's claim, yes, exactly. They say they will produce, but they say...
They want to produce it, yes.
But they say they won't be stable.
Exactly. So they think it would be wonderful to produce them because they will immediately Hawking radiate, as is the term. So Hawking found the radiation in his equations.
Okay.
And this equation is the real safeguard or the real guarantee that CERN has with a signature from Hawking that this is not dangerous. And so this is the deepest...
Yes, true, I remember that.
And the whole world, CERN was claiming in the last safety report that let's assume Hawking radiation did not exist, would then be there some danger, which sounds very fair. But everybody knew in his background, in his mind, of course, Hawking radiation does exist, so we are safe.
Okay,
so
that sounds to me like I would believe in ferries, ferry, and I would speed up with my Ferrari to 350 and say, I'm absolutely sure that when the wall comes, there will be this guardian angel ferry coming and she will save me.
Yeah.
It sounds a bit like that to me.
Exactly, yes. It is a medieval phenomenon.
Okay.
But at the same time, it's a consensus type phenomenon, and there's a science. It's a science called sociology, which deals with such phenomena.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to explain that when very, very many people have made a consensus, it is very, very hard to lick against this consensus. Even if you have hard evidence, it will take 30 years, Max Planck said, until the old generation of scientists has died out before the new truth can become accepted, even if it's 30 years old.
Do you think humanity has 30 years left?
I hope so, yes. I mean, some people think it's less. Even Stephen Hawking sometimes talks bleakly about the future of humankind. He is one of the first people, actually, who seriously proposed to make space colonies, not just for the fun of it, but because this would be a way to guarantee the survival of humanity, of humankind. Yeah. So he is very deep. He is my ally. There are two Stephen Hawkings, so to speak. One is my closest friend and ally, and the other is CERN's ally. And these two somehow fit into one mind. And it would be great if we could together persuade Stephen Hawking to talk once,
but
in a atmosphere of friendship.
Yeah, but this idea of being able to colonize the universe.
Yeah.
When I look at the latest adventures of some companies who tried just to go to out of the Earth, the Earth sphere, They didn't even go to the moon. They just exploded. I mean, like, is the technology ready to populate the universe?
In principle, yes. And I mean, if one would really put much into such an effort, it would also create so much enthusiasm on the planet that it would finance itself, so to speak. So it would not be at the expense of the poor inhabitants of our planet, which is the majority.
So we have two options, Roessler. One is to build the LHC on the moon, or one is that all humanity leaves the Earth and we can continue.
Yeah, unfortunately, not all of humanity can leave it. It would only be a select few which would be chosen to leave it. So not many people would really profit.
I'm not sure that would include me and you.
Not very likely.
Oh, no. That's good. Nice to know.
Yeah,
that's nice to know.
But still, nothing is better than nothing at all. That's an old saying. And if you see, the whole planet would die more happily if one could know that the tradition will not be entirely lost. It's like parents having children knowing they have to die, but their children can go on living. Yes. So the planet could have children in the future, yes. which is very, very important.
Yes, I see. That brings me, I mean, you mentioned the word magic, and it brings me to one question. I mean, the CERN LHC and its, I think, Nobel Prize eager particle scientists remind me a bit of Goethe's poem The Zauberlehrling, or in English, the Sorcerer Apprentice.
Yeah.
You too?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a human condition. And it's, if you wish, it's a temptation if history provides such an opportunity for consensus building and doing something together in a big, very high-level scientific consensus.
Right. So but maybe they cannot control what they're doing, like the sorcerer's apprentice. You know, his boss, the old sorcerer, he went out in the evening, he started to do some experiments, use some magic, and finally the whole castle was underwater, and he was completely panicked until the old sorcerer comes home, and yes. with 2-3 words everything is calm again.
Exactly, yes.
We have the power, like the sorcerer's apprentice had, to use some magic, because we know some books, we have some experience, but are we able to control it?
You put your finger on the right spot, I would say. But all of what we discussed so far is still, how should I say, hypothetical.
Yes.
As if there were no evidence whether Hawking radiation exists or not.
Yes.
But if one has very hard evidence that it has been disproved, then suddenly it is not just a matter of probabilities or judgment or choosing between alternatives, which both are not well known. It suddenly becomes a matter of choosing between something which is proven to be dangerous and leaving to do that. And this has happened unless one person on the planet can prove that the counter-proof to Hawking radiation is false. And there's only one person who is gifted enough to do that after the publications that exist, and that is Stephen Hawking himself. So what we have here is, if you wish, not a battle between 10,000 scientists at CERN and a minority opinion, which happens to be the group that is centered around Tuebingen and some places in the US, like Hawaii. Hawaii was the first place where such thoughts emerged. But that looks like two tiny insects against a big lion. They have no chance.
I mean, the two U.S. scientists, Sancha and Wagner,
yes,
they actually, their first action was not against the LHC in Geneva, but against the Hadron Collider in the U.S., no?
Yeah, the RIC, yes.
The RIC, which older and smaller apparently was. And at that time, I think also all the movie The Black Hole was produced, and it was more in reference to the US Collider then.
Uh-huh.
Is that a possibility? At least it was at the time that the US Collider was still in function.
Yeah, right, yes.
Yeah.
And of course, I mean, nothing has happened so far with these old collision machines.
Yeah.
And so one could extrapolate that probably nothing will happen also in the future.
But that is a good point, Otto, because the CERN has, I mean, there is this huge tunnel, and in the tunnel they have this quite very, very big ALICE, they call it, and CMS. I mean, there are tools that allow data to be harnessed from these collisions.
Look like cathedrals.
They look like cathedrals.
Very impressive.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Very impressive,
Yeah.
exactly. And my question there is just, I read that from all the data that is produced during collisions, only 10% can actually be analyzed.
Much less.
Even less?
Yes.
How much do you think that is?
I have no precise estimate.
Okay,
but
it
it's
could be
much
1%, it could be
much
less. Yeah. Means that 99% or more of the data cannot be analyzed.
Yeah.
Means that if the interesting data happens to be in the part that is not analyzed, how can we know? How can we know if there's Hawking's radiation? How can we know if there's a black hole somewhere? Because we don't see it.
Yeah, but of course one could try to make it, and then maybe one will see it. That's the hope. That's the excuse. As long as one has no theory, what will happen if, first of the probability that they are being produced, that this probability can be shown to be much higher than so far. No, then CERN pretends to believe so at the moment, while at the beginning they believed it is high enough to build a machine. That was one of the reasons to build this beautiful machine. The Higgs boson was the secondary reason at the time. Now it was found, which is wonderful, but unfortunately Hawking radiation has not yet been found, so the main motivation is still going on, and CERN is playing this down. But in reality, the triumph for Hawking that is being expected is still the real motivation for the upgrade of CERN. And it somehow is beautiful. A whole community is trying to prove that one ingenious individual was right. And this is an old myth also on the planet. It's a Messianic type of thinking that is behind this, and Hawking is like almost like Jesus on the cross.
Could we? I mean, based on the know-how that most
he's a holy man. Yes.
Yeah, based on the know-how that most scientists at the CERN are actually atheists, as far as I know.
I doubt it.
You doubt it?
Yeah.
But I hear it so. But basically, what I want to ask is, what you're saying sounds nearly a bit religious. So can we still see the CERN LHC as a kind of religious tool in a certain way?
It's a spiritual tool.
Yeah.
Yes. So the planet has lost so much religion, except for the one of the three Abrahamic religions, about which people don't talk much at the moment, because it's too many.
The Spanish press is actually a bit critical with the CERN, I think, and they often used to call it the God machine in the articles. And I think this had a bit the feeling to me that they want to express that we're trying to play God with the machine.
Yeah, and the cathedral shows that it's related. It's like an Aztec myth. But the Aztec myths usually are misunderstood, as I recently learned. There were people were sacrificed, and hearts were taken out, and so on.
You mean they weren't such nice beings?
It looks very cruel.
Yes.
But I recently learned the truth about this,
Yeah,
which
me
no
too,
one
me
seems
too.
to know.
No, I know that. Yeah, I know that.
So in reality, these were self-sacrifices to make sure that the next cycle of the universe gets started. So they were all Jesuses. So there's a very close parallelism between the old Aztec and I don't know exactly the names of the Indian tribes who had this religion. but it's a very, very Christian religion. And Christianity wiped out the real competitor in South America. And somehow this is also very moving, and one should not be critical of it. So the how do we say, the sobriety of scientific work, finding something new. In many rooms with many little isolated people, with many little computers, but not combined. That this type of science is still possible. And somehow it fell into oblivion. It is not true that 10,000 scientists are more intelligent than one scientist. It never was the case. But 10,000 scientists could start to discuss a new result with a so-called dissident, even if the dissident is not a dissident, but has results which are worthy of being taken seriously. But Hawking alone would be sufficient. I don't need 10,000.
Your last few sentences, for me, went a bit into the spiritual, into philosophical area, and this gives me a good intensive to show this book, because also you have been published in this book.
Yep.
As far as I understand, and Ali Sanaye, I hope I can say this more or less right, he published this book. It's called Chaotic Harmony, a dialogue about psychics, complexity and life, and it contains 25 interviews with you. And I understood from the content of the book that you are a person who is not just interested in one area of science, but you're more like a multidiscipline scientist.
Yeah, as I used
is that correct?
Yes, as I call it, I have no character in science. Yeah.
Do you think that a multidiscipline scientist is a better or a safer scientist because he takes different areas into account and gets the big picture better possibly? For example, in your last interview you mentioned that the medicine, when you became a doctor, you were asked to do remember me the exact name, the oath of the doctor profession.
The Hippocratic oath.
Exactly, the Hippocratic oath. And you said it would be good if such a Hippocratic oath or something similar also went for particle scientists.
Yeah. And I once had the nice experience of flying from Santa Fe to Los Alamos, where it's nice when you fly there with a small plane, then suddenly you land without going down because Los Alamos is so high. But that was one surprise. The other surprise was my fellow travelers, about 5 only, very small plane, and they talked about weapons physics, the whole flight. And I realized how much they loved their topic. You see, weapons physics is a real branch of physics, and it's a very exciting branch. And Leonardo, is he? Yes, he was one of the first to be a very great designer of weapons for his government. So physics contains many sub-disciplines. And if the planet were already unified, if elections as they were instituted in South Africa by the greatest living saint that of memory I can think of, what was his name?
You talk about Mandela.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, he found a way to make sure that without changing the poverty ratio in his country, nonetheless democracy was introduced, which is nothing like that happened ever in the past. But the same spirit can of course be used to make elections on the whole planet, with the same proviso that they won't improve your living standards very soon. There will be 50 years to wait. But nonetheless, you are allowed to vote. There is now one country, one planet, without war. And there's no reason that in the time of the internet, no one talks about this. So the press that suppresses this possibility of instant democracy and instant peace.
Now, what you're saying, Otto, is very near of what the UN says, or something, an organization like that. So,
but they have no clout. You see, they are happy with having been given no clout, and they have to say thank you for the little bit. They're little monkeys, but monkeys are better than no monkeys at all, of course.
Yes, yes. Does that mean that, in your opinion, the time of the end of nations is arriving?
It has arrived a long time ago, yes. And Einstein was one of the people who proposed this. And Einstein and Mandela are very close.
Now I have to say that, I mean, we see that in the EU especially nowadays, that some people are afraid of this losing of nations. They become even more nationalistic in a way.
Yeah,
now you see that in Germany with Pegida, you see that in
it doesn't matter.
countries.
Yes, you see that's the same thing in South Africa. And there are, but nonetheless they have agreed on a level, on a minimum of equality, in the rights at least, not in the possessions. But it makes a lot of difference. I was told that the young lawyers that are black and don't make money, nonetheless are much happier than their ancestors were, who also made no money, but they had also no titles. They had no dignity. And dignity...
Which Mandela was a lawyer at the outset, no?
Yeah. And somehow, I mean, you see, he was a smiler. And I have a big theory in the book called Smile Theory. And that's my real contribution to science. It's not my fight against the LHC. And
that's something Otto told me before when we were driving in the car, that most scientists never smile. And Einstein was one of the few scientists that smiled sometimes. And you also smile sometimes, but you told me that's only a kind of image preservation smile. because you were basically the bad man with the black hole.
No, I'm a child. You see, children are allowed to smile. People forgive children if they are smiling. It doesn't mean anything evil, even though adults might think of that.
And why? This is just a question, because you told me in a phone conversation we had, or an email conversation we had a few days ago. And why were you asked not to talk about the black holes or the dangers at the CERN LHC during these 25 interviews?
Yeah, it was because... first of all, to protect the interviewer.
So my interview is dangerous. Can I still live a few days after this interview?
And the other reason is that, of course, science is so beautiful that applications that border on suicide are a little bit a taboo topic.
Yes.
Even so, I was not unhappy not to be allowed to include dangers in a purely scientific context.
I see that.
And we don't have a purely scientific context here at the moment.
Yeah.
It is a little bit a political context.
Yes. Yeah.
And also a context of trying to generate friendship.
Yeah.
Science also does that. But science, okay, so there's not so much difference, I have to say. Yes.
Professor Roessler, Otto, were you always interested in science since you were a child?
Thank you. I started out with being interested in religion, I have to admit.
But you also studied theology,
yes,
right?
For a few semesters I had two identities as a student, yes. And when I was still in high school, I was...
And did you also study just Christianity as religion, or also did you also touch on other religions?
I also touched on other religions, and something happened when I was 51 years old to my self-identity. I suddenly learned that I'm Jewish. had been a Christian up to that moment. And it was, I realized I can be both at the same time. But the deeper religion is the Jewish religion, because it's older.
Did you read the Talmud?
I didn't read the whole Talmud, but I have it. I have a version of it.
Yeah, yeah.
And I, as a child, I remember meeting Martin Buber. Martin Buber is a very, is one of, like Mandela, is one of the people, or like Hawking, a very big topic.
Good.
One of my favorites.
This reminds me of something, because when I was like 12 years old, there was this movie by also a Jewish person, Steven Spielberg, Close Encounters of the Third Art, or something like that. And this influenced me a lot, this movie, because there was this story, I think this family driving up a mountain, and on top of the mountain there were extraterrestrials, and they were doing big experiments and trying to communicate with them, and the whole setting of the movie, because before that many movies have just shown extraterrestrials as bad people trying to destroy us, and then Spielberg came along with this movie, and later on E.T., which was a bit on the lighter side of a bit more entertainment, but still the idea that some entity from some other planet could be nice, actually. I quite liked that. I was very impressed.
And also AI is a movie by Steven Spielberg.
Yes.
And I think it's an immortal movie again, and it's about immortality also. And Steven Spielberg is one of the biggest minds on the planet.
I think so. Yeah.
So we have a common, how should I say, criminal idea.
And I think like this here, because this interview, the type of interview this is really what I call an InterDoc. It's a bit a combination between a documentary and the interview, also a bit giving a bit background on you and on the history and on the surrounding of the subject.